Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Franz with Create with Franz, the show that helps you to use mindset hacks to sort out your life, move on, and create the life that you really want. And I had to apologize for my terrible voice, but I have a bit of a flu and a sore throat, so that's what you get today. A bit masculine today. So, as you can see, we have a guest and we have Jackie Hardin again. So, welcome to the show again.
Hi, Fran. Thanks for having me again on the show. It's great to be here.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to talk about food again.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a foodie and I love food. But I guess there are cases when food can become a crutch or a way of eating away our emotions. So today we're going to take the chance to talk about B.E.D or B.E.D. It's
Yeah.
one of the new disorders that have been added to the manual, and it's binge eating disorder, which affects about 1.7% of adults and more women than men, and even adolescents, but in a much smaller percentage. So binge eating is when you eat without any control, just eat. Even when you're so full up, you're gonna get cramps, you still eat, and you're gonna hide that from other people. And there are special particular things that are behind this reason. So you're not eating because you're hungry, but it's more an emotional reason. So we're gonna dwell in all of this with your help, Jackie. So tell
Mhm.
us, what do you know about B.E.D that you are happy to share with us?
So, Fran, first of all, B.E.D is actually classified as a serious mental illness and it is a DSM-5. So, it is actually diagnosed by a GP. So, you can go via your GP and get a diagnosis from there. It does affect 700,000 UK citizens, and it can affect both male and female. And it is important to note that actually it primarily starts with people that are the age of 20 and up, and it can affect actually any age, any gender, any ethnicity, any background, and it is one of the most common eating disorders that we have. So I think primarily people think that anorexia and bulimia, they're the most talked about ones, but binge eating disorder is quite common. And it is classified that way. You have a person, I'm just going to move, sorry, I just want to move this across because you've disappeared and I'm staring at a blank wall, which is uncomfortable for me. That's better. So it is, you're right, it is where a person is not hungry. They're eating normally because they're triggered by something, and it can be stress, isolation, boredom, a whole raft of triggers that can sit there underlying and can be the reason why they then choose to go along and begin binging. And it can be that it can just be quite spontaneous, or it can be that it's planned. So a person can actually plan the event from start to finish, and it can take over a course of hours for this to uh, execute the binge. So the binging isn't just over a short period of time. It can take place over a few hours, and it can leave a person feeling rather guilty, ashamed, really disgusted with themselves. So the whole emotive feeling that that person goes through is significant, and again can actually stop them reaching out for help because of the way that they're feeling. Whilst a person actually goes through the binge eating disorder, the people that I've worked with is one, they don't recognize the triggers. So they aren't able to actually, they don't have the awareness of recognizing what it is that is triggering them from kicking off the episode of binging. So, because they don't have this awareness of what it is that's the cause, they can't actually identify what starts it off, what causes the cycle, and then why they enter into it and where they land up, where they're going to. Does that make sense? So they enter into this whole cycle and don't even know why they're there in the first place. So it's trying to raise that awareness with them of what's triggering them into the cycle. The other thing is they can actually have something trigger them. So, for example, stress. And then because of this trigger, they'll begin to plan the entire binge eating. So they'll have their favorite foods that they plan, and then they'll begin to execute it. And when they begin that execution, there is no stopping them from finishing off the binge. And some of them, even when they become aware that they begin executing that plan, they will try and stop midway through the binge. But even if they've discarded the food, they will then still go and get it from the dustbin, or then seek it out so they can actually finish off what they've planned. And that will leave them feeling even more ashamed that they've then gone and sorted out from the dustbin and retrieved it from a place. So even that then makes them feel more disgusted with themselves, more ashamed, more guilty for the behavior that they have. And it's letting them know that this is normal and it is part of the disorder and it is nothing to be ashamed of. And the minute you can start accepting that, the minute you can start working through the whole disorder itself. So where someone feels quite isolated and alone and embarrassed of what it is that they're doing, my first thing to say to them is, you're not alone in this. It's the disorder itself. And actually, if you can recognize that, then you are one step closer to recovery.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. And
Mm.
so this is not a condition that has a genetic root at all?
It can have multiple things. So I think with all eating, like eating disorders, it can come from genetic, it can have psychological, it can be environmental, it can be social, it can be so many ways that it can influence a person, and can be a multitude of them that can trigger it off. And it can also be like a coping mechanism that we use because of the emotional things that we have, and it can become something that is quite addictive. Don't forget that food can actually release off dopamine, which is quite addictive in itself. And so it can be something that we lose control over. And a lot of people can actually say that during binge eating, they almost disassociate, like they aren't even aware of what they're doing, and then come around afterwards. So the whole act in itself is an act of complete loss of control because of the nature of the disorder. So it is a whole raft of different things that will impact a person very, very individually. And I think that's the thing about eating disorder. It's recovery is also quite individual. So the approach that a professional is going to take is going to be very, very individual to that person, because it's not going to be this is one size fits all is going to fix one person. I also think, and for myself, having had an eating disorder, I do think genetics play into it. And when I look at having cousins that have had eating disorders, and my own girls that have had eating disorders, I do think genetics play into it to some point. But I also think that there is something that can trigger that underlying event. So for me, bullying at school and not such a stable home life, and for my daughter, actually bullying at school. So whether or not, I think there would have to be some sort of quantitative and qualitative research that's done against that, and that sits way outside of my area of expertise. But from what I see, there is a lot of trauma and things that do create or sort of trigger the disorder within itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you really feel like you have no hope because this thing is bigger. It's like a monster that makes you eat, although you know that you shouldn't eat that much. So you think you can stop, and it's like almost like a drug state when you are eating and eating, like in this fog. Maybe it would be even, I don't know if people that would binge more on sugary foods, and that would make it even worse. I did read that some people even check their insulin levels to make sure they're doing what they want to do. I didn't go down in detail about that, Fred, but it was interesting. So people think they don't have control, but here we are trying to give hope that there is a way out. And
Yeah.
what is the first step that a person will have to do if they realize they actually have a binge eating disorder?
I would say the first thing that they need to do is reach out for support, and that's any which way they need to go. I would say whether it's letting a family member know, whether it's going to a GP, whether it's seeking help from a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, any sort of support group. There's a lot of them available. Me, you, anybody. It's that first step into going, okay, there is a problem here, and actually it's speaking to somebody. And I think a lot of people don't reach out because that level of shame, guilt, isolation that they feel stops them from doing that. So my first thing would be going, definitely reach out, because whichever route that you take, and whether that is going, okay, I want to go the medical route, whether I want to go the holistic route, whether I want to combine both routes together, there is a way out for people. I work with people that go both routes, and I work with people that go only the one route, which is the holistic route. It doesn't matter which way, everybody is there to support a person.
Okay, so I guess that if I were binge eating, I would first to set up like an uncounted number of sessions until we get back to find out why am I doing that, to find out the reason so we can work on these triggers. Is that a good way of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the different type of triggers that you can have basically stress, you can have hormonal, you can have restriction, you can have dieting, you can have food advertising, you can have isolation, you can have influences from friends, social events, you can have anxiety, depression, you can have so many of the triggers that can set off why you are binge eating. And I think one of the things that working with somebody will help you do is to identify the underlying causes for that. And sometimes it's recognizing that actually binge eating is the coping mechanism for the underlying cause. A lot of the clients that I work with, it's working on that underlying cause. And sometimes it's also recognizing that there is a trauma that can also lie underneath there that also then creates that level of anxiety, or has created that depression, or has created the level of social anxiety that somebody feels, or has created that body dysmorphia, or that that need to restrict, or the need to follow a diet. So or that need to look a specific way, which has led somebody to then binge eat. So it's looking at all the underlying factors that influence that individual, so you can work in a way of how to resolve those, so that you can clear the unconscious, subconscious level, to then create the conscious behavioral system, so you can recreate those behaviors and clear it all out, and then get that person back on track with new coping mechanisms, or no coping mechanisms would be great, because ideally we don't really want somebody having coping mechanisms to deal with. You want to resolve the underlying issue.
Yeah. So ideally, we want a person that no longer suffers from B.E.D and can
Yeah.
recognize the trigger.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also just live a life where actually, everybody's going to have stress, aren't they? There's always going to be a level of stress, but stress is at a level where it's not going to cripple you and impact you into needing to have some sort of crutch. So it's going to be more a form of positive stress, or stress that you can actually work through very, very quickly. And it's trying to help a person recognize that there are ways that you can manage it, so that it actually doesn't cause you to binge eat, or to drink, or to smoke, or to starve yourself, or to restrict. And I think it's working with a person to help them to do that. I think the thing with binge eating as well is people can get themselves into a ways that after a binge, they can tend to feel that they need to restrict. And then when they land up restricting, they can then land up binging. And so they can also get themselves into a cycle, which can be quite unhealthy for them and detrimental for them. And so they can get themselves caught up in a wheel that goes round and round and round. But if they don't get help, I also have clients that the weight gain has been so significant that actually the physical impact on their body is detrimental to them, that they are unable to walk. They are bound in wheelchairs. So the impact on their joints, on their heart, on their organs, on them is so significant because it then makes the weight even harder to shift because they physically aren't able to do so. So their depressive state and their mental well-being becomes more impacted because their physical state becomes diminished. So it then becomes even more of a vicious cycle. And because of that desperation and the loneliness and the isolation that takes effect then, because they're actually really are stuck at home, the binging can become even more I guess it can really take a grip, and it becomes more frequent, and it becomes a lot larger in volumes of food, and yeah, the person becomes really in a place of isolation and depression and sadness, overwhelming feeling of sadness.
I can see how that can really take you to be completely lonely because you don't know what to do, you feel ashamed, you don't want to talk about it, and you might get really upset if somebody mentions that, So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're like, oh, I can never heal from this, I'm just gonna die like this, and they hate themselves. So they might end up with bulimia or something because they're trying to purge, but even so, nothing is gonna fix the damage to the liver and the joints and whatever that is. Quite a
Yeah.
scary condition to have, actually.
Yeah, and it's not bulimia. So it's very, very different in that the person with binge eating disorder will not purge. They will only binge. So they do not purge their food like bulimics do. But yeah, and it can also be where clients can actually then become so gastric band. They can become the NHS can treat them with gastric band surgery. The problem is that if you don't treat the underlying cause, gastric band will work for a very limited time, and then you have clients coming in that actually the weight gain then returns because actually underlying cause hasn't been addressed. And it's, gastric band is a very, very invasive surgery that has to be undertaken, and there are criteria that have to be met. But then there's also a point where weight gain is so significant that people are too big to actually have that surgery because it's too risky for their health. So it then becomes actually where it's quite nice because you can combine the psychotherapy and the hypnotherapy, and you can do the hypnotherapy gastric band surgery and help a client then clear the subconscious and help them also then work with them with the psychotherapy and hypnotherapy to shift the weight, but also address the underlying causes and issues and blockages that they might have.
So that's quite a robust approach to this. I'm not looking at a very quick fix for B.E.D at all. This might take several months of work to address.
I think so. Yeah, I do. I think sometimes sometimes it can be like quite swift and you can all of a sudden go bang. But I think anybody promising like a result in one session, I think that is unrealistic because I think sometimes the underlying cause has been there for quite some time. And I think typically a person doesn't reach out for like 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. I think typically a person has been had binge eating disorder for a long period of time and has been in a period of isolation for also a long period of time, and therefore to work through the issues is going to take a period of time, but that doesn't mean that you aren't going to be able to resolve it. And I do say that after a month, for somebody that is wanting that change, they will start to see significant change. But I think the key word is there is somebody that is wanting to change and to see that change, because otherwise it's almost like if you are resistant to change, it's going to be like pushing, I don't know, a massive snowball or rock uphill. And for me, that's going to be really challenging to push a rock uphill. It's going to be much easier pushing a rock downhill and two of us doing it together. So I think, yeah, somebody wanting to change, you're going to be able to facilitate that very, very quickly.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff to remember for anyone listening, but I can see that there is hope for this. It is
Yeah.
100% possible to get better. It does take time. So
Yeah.
the first big step to take is really talk to somebody, talk to your GP, find a therapist, etc. The second step before we close will be another helpful thing that a person can do today, maybe before they even go to their GP. What can they do?
I would say awareness. I would start trying to recognize your triggers. So there will be triggers in there. And I would say maybe try and raise your awareness. Like, what is it that is resulting in you in starting that binge? If you can start recognizing that and have an awareness of that, you will then be on your way into going, oh, okay, here we are. And the minute you can have that awareness, you can potentially start recognizing, okay, here's a stressor here, and this is how I'm coping with it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? The other is acceptance. The acceptance that, okay, I have binge eating disorder. And do you know, I'm one of 700,000 people in the UK that have it, and this is nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to be guilty of, feel guilty of. This is a coping mechanism, the same as smoking, the same as drinking, the same as every other disorder out there. And you know what? We all have something. So it is nothing to feel guilty or ashamed of or embarrassed of, and reaching out for support. The sooner you do that, the quicker you start your recovery process. That's the second thing. The other thing is your mindful practices. And I think a lot of people poo-poo this, but it is becoming aware of your breathing techniques. It is becoming aware of those journaling. It is becoming aware of other mindful techniques such as walking, such as doing things like that that can actually be used as distraction to help you regain control of your mind and of your body, to help almost gain control of yourself so that you can distract, even if it's for 3 minutes, even if it's for 60 seconds before you enter into that binge. You have then elongated that period of control before you enter into that. That's phenomenal. That's a start. You've started something. So it's that acceptance and awareness and the
Yes.
mindful practices. Brilliant. And reaching out for support. Fantastic.
Very good. I'm glad you mentioned smoking, because every time I worked with people who were smokers, we had to find out what the triggers are, and so anticipate when the trigger happens, shows up in my life, what am I going to do instead? So they had to make a list of things that they can do instead, and they could be done straight away. And going for a walk, taking the dog out, anything just to distract your mind. And so eventually, because you're not responding to the trigger, this connection, the neurons, they wire together and fire together, just goes eventually, because the brain thinks, oh, this is useless now, I don't need this connection. And so eventually, with the help of a good therapist and organizing yourself, maybe not putting the triggers around
Yeah.
in your life, looking at the stress, and also don't put that kind of food in your house so that you cannot eat
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also like belief. Do you know? Belief that actually you can change, because I've got and I have had clients that after 30 days have that change, are no longer binging, have got and have got the results that they want. Fundamentally, like ultimately, as a result of no longer binging, they get weight loss, but never looking at weight loss as the end goal. Looking at, actually, I need to change my behavior of no longer entering into binge eating. And if you believe that actually recovery is possible, you will get that, because it is possible. So always having and holding on to that hope, you will absolutely get that. And I think another thing is like, somehow society has accepted that smoking is one of these things is okay and we can overcome. And it's like, well, if we can overcome that, and that is an addiction, and that is like a vice and a coping mechanism, we can overcome anything. absolutely anything with the right support.
Yeah.
And hypnosis is a brilliant way to do it. Psychotherapy is a brilliant way
Yeah.
to do it. And I think, yeah, belief, yeah, go for it. Why not?
Yeah. Self-medication has many forms, and in the
Yeah.
modern
Yep.
life, that's what we do. We try to smother the pain.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, we think, oh, I need a treat. I need something to lift me up. But after lifting you up, you feel lower. So
Yep.
I'm so glad that we had this episode, because there are lots of things I didn't know about B.E.D, because I never had experience and I haven't worked with a person that had binge eating disorder. So that is so interesting to open up. So I want to thank you so much about giving more of your time to share
You're very
all
welcome.
about binge eating.
You're welcome. You're very, very welcome.
Yeah.
I was going to say there's maybe this is for another one, but it's also about hormonal influxes and how actually that can also result in binge eating later on in life. So
Yeah. Menopause,
yeah, menopause and the sugar cravings and that can actually
the sugar
binge.
high.
Yeah.
Maybe there is time here for a further episode, you guys.
Anyhow, it's been wonderful, Franz. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And everyone, if you liked the episode, please share it with somebody, and you can subscribe, like, and write a review. So thank you for being with us, and have a lovely week, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.